Now let's go on reading. There's no condemnation for those that are in Christ Jesus, who walk not after the flesh, but after the Spirit. That's an important thought, but it comes in again later, and I'll save it for that. Verse 2 says, listen now, for the law of the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus has made me free from the law of sin and death. Now in this first part of Romans chapter 8, there's two pairs of words that go together. One is life and death that are contrasted, and the other is spirit and flesh that are contrasted. And what he's going to show us is that because we're believers in Jesus, on the inside, in who we are in Christ, in our spirit, there is life, and that life has a power to it. On the outside, in the flesh, he just got through describing in chapter 7 what this law of sin and death is. If you want to know what it is, Anton, just briefly, again, give me Romans chapter 7, verse 21. The law of sin and death that he's talking about, he talked about in chapter 7. He says, I find a law that when I would do good, evil is present with me. Why is that? We just read. He said, I see that there's in my flesh there's nothing good. There's sin in my flesh. In my flesh I can't do what I'm supposed to do if it's just me. This also has a lot to do with being self-conscious. We can't look at who we are, outside of Christ. We have to see ourselves in Christ. Go back again to chapter 8, verse 2. The law of the Spirit of life. Now see, this is a different principle at work. The life that I have because of my union with Jesus, he says, it makes me free. It has made me free. It does make me free. It makes me free from this law of sin and death. Now, please understand that this law of sin and death that works in our flesh, it hasn't gone away and it doesn't go away. And your flesh and the carnal part of you is always capable of doing something wrong. And as long as you live, it's always going to be capable of doing something wrong. And the secret, though, of the Christian life is not making the body go away. Years ago, and to some extent even today, people had the idea that if I could just beat down the body, if I could just fast and not eat, and in the Middle Ages they used to whip themselves with whips and suppress and beat and push down the body, and that philosophy is called asceticism. And if I could just practice an ascetic life and just deny the body and whip it and beat it and push it down, then I'll be holy. That's not true at all. You cannot whip the body into subjection. The body, the flesh, is always going to have this nature of sin in it. But what Jesus has done for us is given us something on the inside that has more power and more life, so that if we let what's inside live, the body has no chance to do anything. The flesh has no way to react. Just for a second, Anton, give me Galatians chapter 5. Notice what he says. I'm just going to bring this into it because it's a parallel thought. Galatians chapter 5, verse 16. Look at what he says. This kind of sums it up. This I say then, walk in the Spirit, and you shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. Now notice what he doesn't say. He doesn't say, suppress the flesh and then you'll be spiritual. Did you notice that? But he does say, walk in the Spirit, and you shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. Again, notice he doesn't say, get in a war with the body. Have a fight with the flesh. He doesn't say that. He just says, walk in the Spirit. It's almost like, we make a big mistake sometimes becoming so carnal and flesh conscious and getting in this big warfare with carnal and fleshly things, when in the reality, and please understand how I say this, it would be okay just to forget about it and just say, I need to focus my attention on Jesus and walking with Him. And then he said, you'll not fulfill the lust of the flesh. Now go back again one more time, Anton. Chapter 8, verse 2. The law of the Spirit of life. Think about it this way. Instead of law, let's say principle. The principle, or that's a good word. The principle of the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus makes me free from the law or the principle of sin and death. Now, I've just said that law of sin and death is present, and it's always going to be present in your flesh. But there's a higher law, a better law, a greater force that's at work on the inside of you, in your spirit. It's a little bit like this. Let me liken the law of sin and death that dwells in your flesh to the law of gravity. Did you know the law of gravity is what holds us down to this earth? And it's always present and it's always there. Correct? And if you want to see a demonstration, watch this. Here's the law of gravity. See how I drop down there? 100 times out of 100, if I step off that step, I'm going to drop down there because of the law of gravity. But did you know yesterday at the graveside service, because Daryl Surface was a pilot, they had some pilots do a flyover over the cemetery, and these planes came flying by real low as a tribute to him because he was a pilot. Now listen for a minute. If the law of gravity is always there and it always is at work, how is it that those men can get into that mechanical contraption and then suddenly they're up there in the air? It's almost like, what happened to the law of gravity? How is it that they're up there in the air flying flying by. What happened to the law of gravity? Did it go away? It didn't go away, but they employed some higher laws. Some laws that superseded the law of gravity. When they got into those airplanes and turned those engines on and employed those other laws that make an airplane fly, the law of lift and the law of thrust and force, and I don't know enough about physics to be talking about this, but whatever it is that the airplane employs other principles and other laws, and suddenly if you're in the airplane, you put all those things into operation, suddenly it's like the law of gravity ceased to exist. And if you're an astronaut and you get into a rocket ship and employ some even greater degree of force, you get up high enough and you don't even sense the gravity anymore. Have you ever seen those astronauts? They're just floating around and they have their crackers floating in the air, and the toothpaste and everything. Well, what happened to the law of gravity? Did it go away? It didn't go away, but they put some higher laws into operation. You see, as Christians, we have something on the inside, and that something is the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus. And it's a force, and it's real, and it's a life, and it's real. And when we put it into operation, it has more power. It has more force. It's more real. I think as human beings, we know what it feels like. We know what the law of sin and death, how the kind of force it can exert on us, and the kind of compulsion that we can feel sometimes. But let me tell you something. The law of the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus, if we'll get to know it and if we'll put it into operation, it's got more force. It's got more power. And it's more real than the law of sin and death. Let me read you some other translations of verse 2. Just to help you get it. See, what I like about reading different translations is this. It's like we have something, a truth. See, we're looking at a truth in this verse. And let's just imagine that it's a physical object. And if I read the King James translation, I'm looking at it like that. But you know what I like? I like to get over here and look at it this way. And then I like to look at it that way. And if I read different translations, it's like turning it all different ways, and I'm seeing it from different angles. Because every time one of these men makes a translation, God's Spirit, through that individual, is giving him a view of it that maybe didn't occur to somebody else. This man, let's see, what was his? Tyndale. William Tyndale translated the Bible into English before King James was made. And he got into all kinds of trouble with the Roman Catholic Church, who didn't think there should be any multiple translation. And their argument against Tyndale was, if we let you make your own translation, then somebody else might make a translation. Somebody else might make a translation. And pretty soon there's lots of translations. And the Roman Catholic Church said that leads to confusion. Tyndale, in response, said, no, it does not lead to confusion. If there are multiple translations, he said, it's like having a house with many windows. The more windows, the more light can come in. Isn't that a good thought? And I think that's true. So here is verse 2 from the Berkeley translation. The life-giving principle of the Spirit has freed you in Christ from the control of the principles of sin and death. That's a good thought. Here's another one. For the life-giving power of the Spirit, through union with Christ, has set us free from the power of sin and death. That one I like because it focuses on the fact that we're in union with Christ. And there is a new power in operation. Anton, go back to verse 1 and give me the Message translation. I like the way the Message says it. Starting with verse 1. With the arrival of Jesus the Messiah, the fateful dilemma is resolved. Those who enter into Christ's being here for us no longer have to live under a continuous, low-lying black cloud. That's a good thought. Let's get the next verse. A new power is in operation. The Spirit of life in Christ, like a strong wind, has magnificently cleared the air, freeing you from a fated lifetime of brutal tyranny at the hands of sin and death. Now, why is he telling us all this? Because he wants us to know. He wants us to know we're free. He wants us to know that sin has no real power over us anymore. And it's not that we don't make mistakes. It's not that we don't sin. But the devil has no power. Sin has no power. We're free in Christ. And not only that, here's how free we are. He loves us so much, he's never going to condemn us. He knows we make mistakes. We just read about it back in the past chapter. But he's determined, he's done all this for our benefit. Okay, let's go on reading. I can't take too much time because I want to get to the end because the things I'm starting to say come in at the end.